A bloody day for Turkey. Dozens of soldiers killed in airstrikes in Syria. Could this deadly attack lead to a standoff between Ankara and Moscow? I'm Imran Garta, and today's newsmaker is Turkish soldiers targeted in Idlib. It was the deadliest day for Turkey since it entered the Syrian war in 2016. On Thursday, regime forces backed by Russia killed at least 33 Turkish soldiers. Ankara has hit back, striking hundreds of Syrian regime targets, and President Erdogan chaired an emergency meeting of the National Security Council. The attacks took place in Idlib, the last rebel-held area in Syria, which the Assad regime is desperate to reclaim. But opposition forces backed by Turkey have been clinging on to the northwestern province. The fighting has created a catastrophic humanitarian crisis, forcing millions of people to flee their homes. And after this latest attack, Turkey says it will no longer stop refugees from reaching Europe. So, with this dramatic escalation, what can we expect to happen next? Well, to discuss that, I'm joined here in studio by Talip Kucukcan. He's a senior fellow at the TRT World Research Center. Yaser Tabbara is a former spokesman for the opposition Syrian interim government and now a senior fellow at the Omran Center for Strategic Studies. In Ankara, we have defense and security analyst Yusuf Alabarda, who served in the Turkish armed forces for more than 2 decades. And Samuel Ramani is a researcher at Oxford University, specializing in Russian and Middle Eastern foreign policy and diplomacy. Gentlemen, it's a pleasure having you all on the Newsmakers. Talip Kucukcan, let me begin with you. Are you shocked? Are you afraid of what might happen next after the killing of those 33 Turkish soldiers?
Well, I think this was something unexpected, at least in Turkey. Everybody knew that, of course, when you have soldiers on the ground, there are some risks involved in such activities, in such actions. But Turkey was not expecting such kind of attack, actually, because the Turkish presence was not against the Syrian regime over there in terms of protecting civilians, in terms of fighting terrorism. As you remember, Turkey had 3 cross-border operations before, and Turkey never attacked any Syrian forces before. Therefore, the presence of Turkey was justified on the ground of Sochi agreement between Russia and Turkey to have de-escalation zone so that Turkey can be helpful to the Syrian people over there and also confining the terrorist groups. And now what we can see is that this agreement has been breached by the Syrian forces and Turkey became under attack. And now Turkey, of course, considers this as a direct attack on Turkey and decided to defend its interest at every cost. And of course, we see the presence of NATO and presence of our European allies. But this is a complicated issue.
Right.
And I think the Turkish public opinion has been turning against the Russia to some extent and, of course, to the regime in Syria.
Yaser Tabbara, was Turkey attacked by the Syrian regime or was it attacked by Moscow, or both?
I think it's both. I mean, I think that the narrative, the official narrative out there, would much prefer to pin this on the Syrian regime, obviously, because a direct confrontation between Russia and Turkey is something extremely dangerous, and both sides understand that very well. However, we know that the skies of that area have been very well monitored by the Russians, by Russian drones, by Russian planes. And there have been some narratives out there that do blame Russia for doing this. I mean, this is not very far from the type of approach that the Russians have been taking within the context of Syria. It's a thuggish approach, it's a criminal approach. It's not a diplomatic approach. It's an approach that goes in the direction of scorched earth, bombard as much of civilian infrastructure as possible, put pressure on Turkey through creating a biblically proportioned humanitarian disaster, without any paying any attention or any measurement for the human suffering, the Syrian human suffering that has resulted. So I think that the Russians are directly responsible. Their criminality and that approach has to be put to stop. And as Syrian analysts, we've been saying that for a very long time, and we hope that it gets to a point where the world really wakes up at this point.
Yusuf Alabarda, I mean, I don't even have to ask this anymore. The Assad regime can't really do much without the support of Russia and Iran as well. The Russians are saying, well, those Turkish soldiers were with, their words, jihadis. That's the Russian approach. They were with jihadis, that's why they were in the firing line. Do you find that in any way, shape or form plausible?
Yeah, fighting against terrorism is a lifetime visa for every country to fight against whatever their interests are. Not only in Syria, but also at the same time in Nigeria, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in many different parts of the world. Fighting against terrorism is giving a lifetime visa to everyone. Also, it includes Russia. So the narrative that saying that Turkish soldiers are together with the jihadi groups is unacceptable because they do consider every bearded man as a jihadist. For this reason, there are official statements that from the foreign minister of Russia, foreign minister of the Russian Federation, they openly says that Turkish soldiers are together with some jihadi groups. Mm-hmm. And when you analyze how do they understand that they are jihadis or the rebel groups, they are looking to their beards and to their outlooks. For this reason, it is unacceptable. The position of the Turkey is there, as my colleague said in the studio, is very clear to try to stop the humanitarian crisis and also to defend the Turkish borders from the Idlib area. If the Turkish side do not do this, probably they will be protecting their borders, not at the outside of the borders, but probably inside of the borders. For this reason, this is not acceptable. This is a narrative is being used by many countries in all over the world since from September 11.
Right. So, Samuel Ramani, it begs the question, what does Russia actually want?
Well, I think that Russia was seeing this offensive and the violation of the Sochi agreement as an opportunity to give Assad full control over Idlib. And if you look from December to February, what you see is a record of military success for the Assad regime, accompanied by tremendous humanitarian costs, among the likes we probably haven't seen yet in this conflict, with 900,000 people becoming IDPs in those 2 months alone. So the Assad regime, in a quick-fire way, managed to gain control over the M4 and the M5 highways. It seized control over a rebel stronghold in Manad al-Shuman, and then Sarakeb, and then it was pushing for the completion of Idlib. So the Russians figured that this was a gamble that was proving to be successful. What they didn't anticipate was that Turkey, even though it's involved in northern Syria, even though it's involved in Libya too, would actually put its money where its mouth was, so to speak, and fight back against and launch a successful counteroffensive. In the past 72 hours, Turkey taking over Narab, and then Sarakeb after that, liberating those areas from Assad's control, alarmed the Syrian regime. And what I think happened was that the Syrian regime appealed to Moscow to do something, and in collusion with the two, in a desperate attempt to try to stop the Turkish counteroffensive, they made this impulsive reaction. And now they have a spiral and uncontrolled escalation in their midst.
Yeah, and Yaser Tabbara, I want you to put yourself in the mind of your enemy, if you like, the Syrian regime. You don't mind me saying the Syrian regime's your enemy, right? Okay, so they took Khan Sheikhun last summer, Marat al-Numan last month. They feel like they're on the verge, on the cusp of retaking Idlib, as Samuel mentioned, right? Would they do whatever it takes to get that done, even if it means Turkey and Russia end up fighting each other?
Plausible, but let me just say that the Assad regime is the enemy of any Syrian with conscience, really. So I hope that that's clear. Yes, I mean, I think what we've seen Bashar al-Assad doing over the past years is to try to regain and push that propaganda that his forces are regaining and will regain in control of the entire territory of Syria. But I honestly think that this issue has to do more with Putin than Assad.
Tell me why.
Putin has some internal calculations. He has a lot of internal issues that he's dealing with. He needs to basically score a point that he has been able to keep Assad and the regime, despite the fact that the entire Western community has repeatedly said that they should go. And there is a deadline for Vladimir Putin, which is the presidential elections of 2021 in Syria. And the Russians have been very clear that by then, their plan is for the entirety of the Syrian territory to go back to the control of Bashar al-Assad. Obviously, what that really means, it means the control of Iranian militias, foreign militias, Russian army, and all sorts of different actors. But what's dangerous about that narrative, actually, is the fact that that includes areas that have been basically enforced as safe havens by Turkey for at least a couple of years now. We're talking about the Olive Branch area, we're talking about the Euphrates Shield area, we're talking about these types of areas, the peace operation areas. Those are under Putin's agenda to completely clear by 2021. And I think that is the real issue, and that's where the attention should be put.
And it's worth mentioning again that this was supposed to be a de-escalation zone, so it makes a mockery of Sochi, of Astana, and all these other agreements. Talip Kucukcan, if Yaser is right, and this is all about Vladimir Putin, so when Turkey says we're a NATO member, Article 5, attack on one is an attack on all, NATO has to come to our defense. Yes, we've heard from Jens Stoltenberg and others saying our sympathies with Turkey, our solidarity, our support, and so on. But looking at the big picture, is Putin gambling because he knows that NATO doesn't want to go to war with him, even if it's over Syria?
Let me say that my colleague is right. I actually agree with him that next step after Idlib will be those operational areas where some sort of stability was established, I think. And Turkey has some gains over there with the civilians at all. I think the next step, if Idlib falls down, if Turkey withdraws completely, the next step will be the other areas that the Russia and the regime will go. When it comes to the reaction of the NATO, for the last, I think, couple of years, the Russia has been humiliating the Western alliance in many cases. European Union, the United States of America, and the NATO. Look at the Crimea issue, look at the Ukraine, and you can clearly observe that the Western alliance or the Western world has been criticizing Putin and the Russian regime. But on the ground, I think Russia has been the winner in that sense, because the reactions were rhetorical, on the discursive, but on the ground, except some economic sanctions, there was no hard power used against Russia. Therefore, Russia is taking some risks, maybe. But when we look at the reactions of the NATO, reactions of the European Union in other crisis areas, they were not very effective. And I think it's time that both the European Union and the NATO should come forward with maybe a stronger voice, not only on the rhetorical level, but also on the hard power level. So they can deploy soldiers, they can deploy patriots, they can deploy some sort of hard power to discourage Russian.
But they don't want to go to war with Russia. So how much can they do, falling short of going to war with Russia?
Well, if they don't want to go against Russia, they have to accept Russian incursions here and there. That means whether it is the interest of the US, whether it is in the interest of the European Union and NATO, I don't think so. So it's up to the, of course, members of the NATO and the members of the European Union, and of course, as one of the world leaders, United States of America, whether this liberal world order, whether the free world will give up in the aggression, in the face of aggression by Russia.
Right, and I'm glad you mentioned the United States, because I want to bring up what Senator Lindsey Graham said not too long ago. He spoke of appreciating Turkey's intervention in Idlib. He said it's now time for the international community to establish a no-fly zone to save thousands of innocent men, women, and children from a horrible death. And he also, spoke of the brutal aggression. That's what he called Russia and Assad doing in Idlib, and he called it a humanitarian disaster. Yusuf Alabarda, do you think that Lindsey Graham's president, Donald Trump, the commander-in-chief, will go along with this? Do you think that the Americans will get involved to the extent of perhaps establishing a no-fly zone, and can it work?
Yeah, in theory, it is practical. In theory, it is possible, but I do not think that in the practical that United States will declare a safe zone in terms of all kind of air defense system will be working in this area. Area access and area denial will be declared by the United States. When you also take a look at to the NATO-Turkey relations from the historical perspective, starting from the Johnson letter, which has been written and given to the president of Turkey in 1963, I didn't see as a military analyst that NATO acted together with the Turkey, nor in 1960s or not in Cyprus peace operation. and to fight against terrorism also. For this reason, I do not think that NATO will come and will strive through together with his alliance. The only thing that the Europe and the NATO countries will try to help in some case to the Turkey. Maybe if the refugees knock their door in the Paris, in the Berlin, in the London, maybe they will understand that the Turkey is the only barrier to those 4 million refugees inside this country and 4 million potential refugees who's trying to escape to the Europe, and they will understand.
Yusuf, sorry to interrupt you. So is that the reason why we saw so soon after the Turkish government saying, well, the border's open, these refugees can go to Europe? Is that why the Turkish government sees it as directly linked to the military situation on the ground?
I do think yes, because I can say that the European foreign policy vision is a short-sighted policy. The only language that they will understand in their comfortable chairs, how many refugees will be in the Paris, in the Berlin, and in the other comfortable cities, luxurious cities of the Europe. If you try to barricade all those refugees, and if you are the only barrier for them, and if you shoulder all kind of economic problems and the other problems, they won't care about. But in case they see those refugees are flowing by way of the Balkans and southeastern Europe to their cities, they will probably react as soon as possible.
Samuel Ramani, are the Europeans and other NATO members going to give Turkey the reaction that it wants as the borders open?
Well, that's an interesting question. It's hard to say at this point. I think that as of now, the NATO reaction has been exactly what you would have expected, with Jens Stoltenberg expressing solidarity with Turkey, but not necessarily committing anything further. Because the illegal arguments that are coming through in the United States and also in Europe, from what I've seen, is that Turkey is intervening in Syria. And this is not backed by the United Nations. This isn't an actual NATO mission, and it isn't at the invitation of a UN-recognized government. So it wasn't a strike on Turkish territory. So therefore, there isn't the compulsion to intervene militarily from a purely legal standpoint. And that seems to be the overarching thinking. And it remains an open question whether Europe will actually act independently. Lindsey Graham may be talking tough from the American side, but Mark Esper, the U.S. Secretary of Defense yesterday, categorically said that there was no way in which the U.S. was going to re-enter the Syrian conflict in any way, shape, or form. Now, it's hard to see the Europeans acting unilaterally. Also, it's important to note that the European response towards Turkey, as we saw during Operation Peace Spring, is very much bifurcated along a Franco-German axis. There was a division about, for example, whether to impose an arms embargo on Turkey or whether to confront them there. France, just last week, for example, was continuing its anti-Turkish posturing by supporting Greece in its claims to the Eastern Mediterranean gas fields, whereas Germany is more sympathetic towards Turkey. There really isn't a coordinated European response that I think is prepared to help the Turks. The only thing that Turkey can do is show them the refugee problem, highlight this, and basically hope that a crisis will bring everyone together. But even that, I think that there's too much cleavages between left and right and domestic cleavages between European integrationists and far-right parties that maybe even make that crisis not as compelling as it may look on the outside.
Talip, if that doesn't work, if the Europeans say, okay, well, yes, you have a refugee problem, but our borders are still closed.
Well, I think it's not only a refugee problem, it is also a security problem for Europe as well. And the European security starts in the southern flank, that is Turkey. And it is not only the refugees that are going to go to Europe, but also some of the radical people, some of those who are isolated, some of those who are looking for new identities, vulnerable people who could be at the hands of the radical groups. I think this is a danger for Turkey, for Europe, for NATO. Therefore, European Union should have more comprehensive foreign policy agenda. It's not only the refugees. Yes, in 2015, we have seen how alarming it is. And this time, it will be alarming as well, because if Idlib falls, and if 2 or 3 million people will be coming to Turkey, Turkey will not leave those innocent people and civilians at the hands of the regime. Turkey will take them. But let me give you some statistics. If you go to Gaziantep, Şanlıurfa, and Hatay, 25% of this population is of Syrian origin. It will be almost 50%. This is not something that Turkey can deal with it anymore. I think it's been stated repeatedly, and this burden should be shared by the international community, by the European Union as wealthy, as progressive region.
Yaser Tabbara, as we talk about conflict between nation states, we talk about soldiers being killed, do we sometimes not give the Syrian people as much attention as we should?
I mean, the question that I had over the past few minutes of this conversation is that isn't it really disturbing to see that, you know, Syrian people, individuals, humans, are basically the, you know, the bargaining chip that, or, you know, are used as pressure points, whether, you know, regarding the European question or, you know, the way that the Russians have over 60% of Russian you know, military bank targets are civilian infrastructure. We're talking about hospitals, we're talking about schools, we're talking about bakeries, we're talking about markets. Everybody understands that that is the pressure point. And isn't it disturbing that everybody talks about it? I mean, for us Syrians, this is beyond a geopolitical question. This is beyond you know, international relations. This is a humanitarian disaster that involves almost 1 million people that are internally displaced, and many, countless of them are facing dire conditions. Just the past couple of weeks, we've heard of the death of small children freezing to death because of weather conditions. And to be honest with you, I mean, as Syrians, we put the blame on everybody when it comes to how this disaster has been dealt with.
As we look forward now, a lot of people are afraid that there might be head-on conflict between major powers here. Let's have a little listen to Sergei Lavrov, who was speaking earlier. Have a little listen, and I've got a question for Yusuf after this.
There is always space for dialogue. Today, Putin and Erdogan spoke over the phone at the request of the leader of the Republic of Turkey. It was a detailed conversation dedicated to the necessity of fulfilling the initial agreements on the Idlib de-escalation zone.
Yusuf Alabarda, we don't know exactly what was in that phone call, but Lavrov coming out and saying there's room for negotiation, there's room for dialogue and so on. Is that just diplomat speak, or is there a genuine opportunity to walk this back and to still get back to the table without escalation?
Yeah, the second choice. Probably there will be always a room to negotiate and to hold the diplomacy. For this reason, I really give a chance to the diplomacy. But what Lavrov says, when you take a look at his explanations, which is very normal from the perspective of a foreign minister, should also speak like this. But as far as I know also that in the next coming days, Mr. Putin and Mr. Erdogan will have a summit bilateral in terms of a ceasefire in this region. I do not know if this works or not, but if the conditions are still like this, and if Russia and regime will wait in order to keep a little bit more reinforcement to their structures and attack again, that shouldn't be. For this reason, the frame of the ceasefire for the next coming days, if there is one, should be very highlighted in terms of it should be considered as a safe haven. But I do not think that till 2021, Russia and regime will never be hesitating to attack when the circumstances against to those people who is living inside the Idlib area is suitable for them. For this reason, if you have a hammer in your hand, you will see all the world as a nail, and I think that Russia will keep on together with the regime in order to capture all these areas. For this reason, it should have a cost to the regime, it should have a cost to the Russian side. For this reason, what is going on inside the field now, they are paying the cost, whatever the circumstances are.
Samuel Ramani, how close are we to the point of no return? Are we flirting dangerously with that edge?
I think we definitely are. I think that we're in the risk of what the Russians like to always call an unmanaged confrontation. I think that certainly the Russian warships with caliber missiles flying near the Bosphorus, and those missiles that they used in June of 2017 to target rebels in Hama, and then Turkey's subsequent threats to perhaps close down the Bosphorus to Russian ships, and the Russians worried about that, is just one area where there could be a clash in the naval sphere. If Turkish and Russian jets are firing over, and also keep in mind, Israeli jets are also involved in this. Yesterday, 3 Syrians died in terms of Israeli bombings in southern Syria. We're at the risk of eventual aerial clash. And I also think that even though Lavrov does talk about scope for dialogue, that's largely just Russian doublespeak. I mean, the
Right.
Russians have always said they're committed to a political solution. They're the leaders of the Astana process. They don't want that process to die. And with the fact that Putin is not willing to really meet with Erdogan, even yesterday when he was talking about this, outside of a trilateral framework that includes Iran, knowing that Iran and Turkey are almost as hostile to each other at this point as Russia and Turkey, is a sign that Russia is not really serious about de-escalating this at all. So we have to take Lavrov's words here with a grain of salt.
Yaser, 40 seconds, 30 seconds left on the live program. In 15 or so, wrap us up.
This is a historic moment in the Syrian conflict where the West really has to wake up and put Russia at bay. You know, Fred Hoff, actually, former Assistant Secretary of State in the US, have a famous saying, until and unless credible threat of use of force is used against Assad and Russia as a real deterrence, Russia and Assad are going to continue, and they're going to go far beyond where they are right now.
Yaser, Yusuf, Samuel, Talip, pleasure having you all on the Newsmakers. Thanks so much for joining us, and thank you for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.